Should be any second now. I'm still waiting for GovTV.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And Mr. Chair, we are live, Mr. Chair.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Intergovernmental Legislative Committee on today, February the 17th, a little after 3 o'clock. We do have a quorum of the committee, and so we also have some timing, if you will, conflicts that we'd like to deal with. So we're going to deviate a bit from the agenda to have our Mr. Padilla, who is representing us in Santa Fe, give us an update on some of the legislation that he's working on. Then we'll get back to the agenda as we post it. So, Mr. Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first is today was the first committee that they had for that one tax bill that would have an impact on the city of anywhere from 27 to 37 million. The Tax and Rev Committee in House heard the bill. A lot of the legislators, they said that they need to figure out a way to protect the city and make sure that we're being harmed, but that's municipalities around the state. The Muni League did a really good job of getting people to come to the meeting. They had a reception last night. And so a number of mayors and city managers and county people also showed up to testify and said that they support the concept and helping us create a business-friendly environment, but they wanted to be sure that municipalities weren't harmed because we're not experiencing the huge revenue growth that the state is. We anticipate there being a possible omnibus tax bill, so we'll keep an eye out on that and see what we can do. The next thing is capital. The legislators, the way the process worked is we pushed all of our projects out to the legislators. They went through last week and selected the names that the projects that they were interested in. Those lists were generated late yesterday. So we started to talk to a few legislators about what's going on with the capital program and answer any questions that they have. We expect most of them to be doing their capital request next week. A couple of them started doing it now, but don't expect most of them to do it until next week. There were some specific questions that I know that Councilor Feeblecorn had. One question was about an emergency capital outlay request for the Walmart in District 6. That was one that a lot of the legislators were calling about. They wanted us to see what we could do with that property. A lot of the constituents were concerned. So what we did is we did a $4 million capital request for metropolitan redevelopment money, targeting that area. The two legislators that are three that are interested a lot in this are Pro Tem Mimi Stewart, Senator Antoinette Cedillo Lopez, and Representative, I'll just say Janelle. I can't remember how to pronounce her name. I apologize. So they're working that was a request that was really spearheaded by them, and we're just helping them out with it. Another question is, what are we doing for the last week of capital outlay? What we're doing now is talking to them. So we'll go into legislators' offices. We'll be seeing what they're interested in, providing information. If we get a project that's fully funded, let's say that there's a fire apparatus that's fully funded and they are interested in that, what we can do is redirect to another project. That's kind of what we're doing now. But when they have questions, usually they'll ask us what they're interested in. We tell them, here's what we are interested, here's what the priorities are. And then we just answer their questions. And sometimes they'll ask questions like, have you heard anybody else funding this? How much they have? And then we can say, yes, we have this much money coming forward. So we'll be dealing with that next week. For the most part this week, they just got their information list. I believe it was late last night. Those are the questions from Councilor Feeblecorn. The other legislative priority, the legislative stuff that we're looking at, there's some of the MCI bills. I know some of those are moving through. I'm not really the lead on those, but we do have some, we are watching them and we're paying attention to them. And then I know Tom Minicucci, I think he's the one that's tracking some of the council stuff. So I'll go ahead and defer to council staff to discuss what's going on with some of the other legislative priorities.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So we basically have just at this point in time been listing it on the spreadsheet. And Jeff, I don't know if you have, I think he's not in the share, but we have an update spreadsheet we'll send out to the members of this committee that's broken out both by just bills of interest to the city than bills that are addressing our state legislative priorities. At this point in time, except for the one tax bill that Isaac just spoke about, we haven't been tracking anything too intensely. So we'll start to, now that we're not identifying bills and getting those listed, we'll probably start to track a few more meetings. We do know that Mr. Armijo is attending a lot of meetings and Mr. Padilla. So hopefully we can coordinate with them before we double up on that. So that's probably a report there.
Okay, very good. So if you could just get the tracker to all the members of the committee, Tom, when you guys have it updated, that would be great. Appreciate that.
And we'll
all
hopefully.
Right. Okay, great. And now I'll turn over to Mr. Griego Montoya. Eric, can you give us an update on the policy work that you're fighting for?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to add to what Isaac said, the one of the priority MCI bills for the city, as you all know, has been this warrant backlog bill, which I know APD and our team's been working really hard on. We were able to get $7 million into HB2, which passed the floor of the House and is headed over to the Senate. Our original request was 20 million so that we could fund sort of this joint effort between not just the city and the county, but all of the rest of the judicial system, the courts, DAs, et cetera. So we're trying, as it goes over to the Senate, our lobbying team is trying to make sure that we can try to get some additional funding put back into HB2 on the Senate side. Or not put back in, but to add it to the 7 million. Just a reminder for the committee and for the public that the idea is to use that as a fund for all of the relevant criminal justice players, including law enforcement, DAs, the courts, and MDC, to use that as we try to sort of pursue these felony warrants and use that for overtime, but also just to sort of make sure that the cases are handled expeditiously and there's adequate staff and resources for that. So that's a big priority. That would be a really, really important part of our crime agenda. HB9, which is the Bernie Hargrove bill, as you all know, passed the House, and we're just waiting for that to be heard on the Senate side in Judiciary. It's scheduled. We hear that there is some support for that, and that's obviously an important bill for especially for public safety and gun violence prevention around minors having access to weapons. The other bills, several of our MCI bills around asset forfeiture, around increasing penalties, around, for example, using firearms in a drug-related crime, and others just didn't. They were all voted down yesterday. So we have a few of our bills still in play. Last two quickly, Mr. Chair. As you know, council supporting part of the joint legislative agenda was this Metropolitan Redevelopment Act expansion so that we could raise additional resources to do all of our metropolitan redevelopment efforts in the city. That we believe will be scheduled on Tuesday in the Senate Tax Committee. Our team, our MRA team, and a lot of other MRI communities around the state have been working to make sure that we support that as a way to make sure redevelopment happens in all of the designated areas, not just in Albuquerque, but around the state. That, and then the last one, we also were trying to make sure that our automated speed enforcement legislation to actually provide due process and be able to expedite citizens who want to sort of challenge or be heard on a traffic citation, that we could do that in a way that honors everybody's constitutional rights. Representative Chasey has introduced that bill, and it'll be heard this week as well. I think that's most of our other bills that we've been working hard on.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Eric, for that report. Look, I think both of these issues are all of this stuff is going to start coming together in a much more expedited fashion, right? We're just about a little over the halfway point. And so now in the last couple of weeks, we'll start really getting some of these bills moving to the committee processes and then to the floor of the House or the Senate. I think the only other point I would make is as these processes start moving quickly on these bills, I know that Eric and both you and Isaac and our two lobbyists, David and Joe, making sure that if you need us or you need any of the counselors or any of the administration folks on some of these legislation to testify in or to make phone calls, etc., let us know, because this stuff will become more and more fluid as you all know. Things start to move very quickly. And I'm sure I can speak for Tom and his group. I'm sure if they need to get information from counselors to legislators, they'd be more than happy to get them as soon as possible. Right. Okay, well, look, I think counselors that were able to join us via Zoom or via phone, I understand that there's any other questions from any other members of the committee. I know this was going to be a short meeting for sure. Is there any other issues that we need to talk about as it relates to our agenda, Mr. Minicucci?
Yes, Mr. O'Donnell here with a quick presentation, I think, and myself and Mr. Greg follow up regarding the congressional directed out pending project.
Okay. Is Mr. O'Donnell on the line? I didn't see him on my screen.
I believe he is.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Oh, very good. Thanks, John. Well, before we start, John, let me just tell Isaac, if you need to get out because of the committee hearing, thanks for your report. Appreciate it. And we'll keep touching base with you. John, good afternoon. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I have a brief report. Kyriakis and I spent some time with the New Mexico congressional delegation this week. And as you know, the two senators' forms, their preliminary form came out, it was either Tuesday or Wednesday. Senator Lujan has a shorter form, and his preliminary form is due back by February 28th. Senator Heinrich's form is longer and in some ways really kind of duplicates what the full form was like from Senate Appropriations last year. He does not have a deadline on how quickly you have to have it back to him, although Rebecca Vizia, his chief of staff, told Kyriakis and me in a meeting that the sooner the better that you get it back, but they don't have a hard deadline for that first round. The question has been asked about where the House appropriations forms are, and the answer to that is they're not yet available because the Republican majority on the Appropriations Committee have not released a form yet. Congresswoman Stansberry and Ledger Fernandez's office told us this week that they expected maybe next week after the House returns. So that's where we are. One more thing that I've mentioned before is it's very clear, because Rebecca Vizia mentioned it again in the meeting this week, that if you have a priority project that you want Senator Heinrich to seek funding for, submit it only to him. We met with Senator Lujan late on Monday afternoon and some of his staff, and he did not actually say the same thing, but it was clear in what he was describing to us that, you know, if you have a priority, you must decide who you want to send that to in regards to the Senate. And I'll tell you what the background to that is very briefly. What happens is the Senate Appropriations Committee makes so much money available to each senator. That's not a science, it's an art. We don't know what that number is. But what the committee does, and the reason why Senator Heinrich wants you to prioritize stuff to him and prioritize stuff to Senator Lujan, is because when the committee does the bookkeeping, if it's a $5 million appropriations request that the two senators are both supporting and submit, that 5 million gets counted against Senator Lujan's total and Senator Heinrich's total. So Senator Heinrich's feeling on this has been, or is, we don't want to get double counted like that. I want my 5 million going there and he wants his 5 million going over. So it's 10 million in terms of requests instead of 5, the way the bookkeeping turns out with the Appropriations Committee. So that's the rationale. And the staffer who explained this to me this afternoon said, and I got to tell you, she said, in all candor, I have to tell you, there's probably some other craziness going on behind the scenes with the committee, but that's the way it is. So that explains why that prioritization is in place this year.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, that's my report.
All right, well, that makes sense. And just so you'll know, John and Tom, since I'm sure the councilors might ask you, we're working through our process now that we know the deadlines, and we've sent out to our department heads to start giving us projects that they feel would be eligible for us to vet to the committee, et cetera, and submit to you all for consideration for getting them into the members' hands. And we're trying to get this done in the next week or so. So hopefully we'll have something for you very shortly.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, could I add something? Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I know what happens in this process, that there gets to be a rush to get this material into the congressional offices. And in the last couple of cycles, the congressional delegation staff will engage directly with either council staff or administration staff and talk about certain ways to do the earmarks. I don't want Kyriakis and myself to fall out of that process, because sometimes, let me put it this way, sometimes there's some information we have about ways to approach an earmark request that I don't know congressional staff, even though they're very well informed on many things, that they have the same perspective we have of the city's interest or a particular request. So I would just ask that before these requests are sent back to the delegation, we have a chance to talk with the staff people who were responsible for writing up the material.
Okay, we'll try and make sure we get those conversations going so that we don't get too far ahead of ourselves.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Chairman, I'll just add that from the council side, we just now working with Mr. O'Donnell this afternoon to get a message out to the councilors. We hopefully have that out late today. The council there.
Look, Mr. Chairman, I have another remark related to that.
Okay.
I looked at what the message that is going to be communicated to the councilors. I don't want you to think that public safety, mental health, and behavioral health are the strict limits to what people ought to be asking for. But again, it does reflect some of the conversations Mr. Pagonis and myself have had with delegation staff, not asking them to tell us what the priorities are, but telling them that what we recognize in the past 2 years is that public safety, mental health, behavioral health, public health have been a priority. And what we're saying in this memo that it was going out is that we still see those things as having high priority with the delegation. But as you well know, they funded the rail trail for $3 million in Albuquerque. So it's not exclusively those categories, but they recognize those. And the other thing that we heard is when it comes to projects that get involved with public safety, think broadly about public safety and justice. If you have an idea that you may not think fits, that's where I come back to this point. Talk to Kyriakis and myself about it.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you much for those tips. Good input. Any other issues for the committee to consider? If not, with that being said, then we'll adjourn our meeting this afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks.
Thank you.